So, welcome to the third part of our DMANTA research on comparing tropical to sidereal. If you haven't seen the other two videos, you have to do that because this won't make any sense without them, especially the first video kind of lays out the principles we're testing here. The second video, we looked at the charts of really top intellectuals, unquestionable intelligence, and now we're going to look at some more borderline people, but definitely still researchers, and see what's coming up. The first one we're going to look at is Masaru Emoto, commonly referred to as Dr. Emoto, and he was a very unique researcher. Some people may or may not have heard of him, but he became very famous because he studied the effects that our feelings and our thoughts have on the structure of water and how they can change, the crystallization of the water and the different patterns it formed. And what he was claiming was that when nice thoughts were being formed and everything, the crystals formed in very, beautiful, symmetrical kind of patterns. When they weren't, then they were, a lot harsher, jagged, kind of rough patterns, something along those lines. I'm not totally familiar with all his conclusions, but I do know, a lot of his research was very questioned by the scientific community for a lot of reasons. So he's borderline, getting into interesting territory / possible quack. So I'm not going to make a judgment call on his research at all. But I do find him an interesting figure because he was, he has some connections with Vedic thought on that level where, it's very commonplace in Ayurveda, yoga, what we think does influence the objects and the surroundings around us. And this is, one of the basis of this knowledge. And anybody who's practiced yoga or anything on a deeper level too, I mean, it's unquestionable how our minds influence the space and the objects around us. So I'm sympathetic with his research, but from a straight scientific point, who knows? But either way, we can see how it's working out with his chart. We see here his Lagna Lord is Jupiter in the sidereal. Once again, Jupiter being that Karaka, one of our Karaka planets, coming up yet again without fail. And once again, I picked these charts randomly, so I had no idea what I would find. And Jupiter has gone to the 8th house. It's exalted, and it's with the 3rd Lord Rahu. Very strong combination right away just from that alone. We see that he's also aspected by the other 3rd Lord, Saturn, who's sitting in the 6th house. So some connection there with the 3rd and the 6th house. We see that Jupiter, and I think this is one of the key points of his chart, Jupiter and Moon are in a parivartana together, which is, Gajakeshari yoga, which can give, which can, really bring a lot of fame to someone and their image and their outstanding. What's more interesting in this combination is that Jupiter is in a water sign, exalted. Moon is in a water sign. And with this parivartana, it's acting as if its own house of research. And, he brought together this kind of overarching theory. Once again, like in Tesla's chart, we see a very strong 12th house, Piscean, Jupiter influence, a much higher level to the research and understanding that goes beyond just basic, physical reality that you get where you look at, someone like Noam Chomsky's chart, which had a heavy kind of Martian influence on it. And, Chomsky gets really into politics and war and very strict analytical thinking. So here we see a little more expansive quality to what's happening with the Ascendant Lord. So, it's in this way that we can start to see some of the other things that play that really help to define the nature of this person's intelligence that sticks out with, how they're, where they're getting their research from. We do see that 5th Lord Mars is in Kendra, supporting some. It's in its own house. Not a strong indication, but, one of those side indications that we were looking at before. Now, if we go over to the tropical chart, we see that, We have Jupiter once again, ascendant lord, gone to the ninth house, which is still a nice placement, less suggestive of research than the eighth lord. And he was really more of a researcher than a strong intellectual than anything. So not quite a sense in the qualitative aspect. More significantly, Jupiter has lost its exalted status. It's not in a water sign, so we don't see that strong sambandha with the moon who is strongly associated with the water element. The moon's lost its digbala too. I forgot to mention that before. Moon had directional strength in that chart. Those details really matter here. It's with Rahu, the third lord, so still a Dimanta combination. We see that the other third lord, Saturn, and the sixth lord, Venus, are there in their Rashi aspecting the ascendant, so it's still some Dimanta combinations going on. So still a pretty strong chart. You could make an argument that one's stronger than the other, but I really still think the sidereal, it's pretty clear here. Just that Jupiter Moon combination, you can't miss that, considering his research. But to go on, we have Emmy Noether. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name exactly, but she's really another one of these dark horses, like a Nikola Tesla, but really super important person in the field of physics and mathematics. Even like Einstein called her one of the most important women mathematicians, but I don't think she needs to be qualified as a woman. But if we do take that, definitely extremely important mathematician in her own right. She invented a theorem that united two pillars of physics, which had to do with symmetry in nature and universal laws of conservation. So she's uniting these two ideas, bringing them together, which is what a lot of these, Dimantis are doing, is bringing things together. So what we've been seeing so far is that oftentimes there's a lot of planets in one house. There's a lot of those opinions in one house, and somehow they're being brought together, and they need to be brought together through strong lords, strong associations, in order to bring that genius level capability. So I think that's one important factor that's coming out, and you see less of those impacts on charts of people who kind of focus in one area. So like in this chart, she was more focused in mathematics. So we don't see the 4-planet connection there as we did in some of these other charts like Chomsky, where he brings together so many different fields in his work, or Campbell, who brought together so many mythologies and has I think 5 planets in the 7th house. So here's still a lot of planets connected, but not quite as intense. So something interesting to pick out. And her theories, where she united these two pillars, was really important, just as important as Einstein's relativity theories, and it underlines much of the modern research in physics, where they're looking for like the Higgs boson particle, which has to do with the underlying field of existence. Okay, so they're searching. This is what physicists are searching for now, and they couldn't do that work without her contributions. So when we look, we see in the sidereal chart, we see Venus is the lord of the ascendant. It's exalted, which pretty good placement in itself. But then more importantly, we see a connection with Jupiter here. So those two are in a parivartana. Jupiter's ruling the 3rd house. It's in an 8th house, which is still can have some influence on the research field. It has some associations, with going deep. But it has a parivartana, so bringing that strong connection there. And Jupiter being the 6th lord as well, it's Rashi aspecting the ascendant. We see our other karaka for the Dimanta is Mercury. It's placed in the 5th house, once again aspecting the ascendant. Pretty strong connections. Moon is strong in Taurus, once again, very strong moon. I mean, beautiful chart. And if we want to take it one step further, we see that the ascendant lord and the 3rd and 6th lord Jupiter is hemming the 5th lord Saturn there. So it's placed. You see how Saturn's placed right in the middle of those two placements. beautiful chart too. I mean, even if you just look at the diagram here, how everything's connected, it's a very symmetrical chart. It's less combobulated than the other ones, and which is really interesting how her theories had to do with symmetry in nature, universal laws of conservation, which could be seen as an eighth house thing with longevity. But the most important thing is how she connected them, and so you see that parivartana in effect, two distinct fields. And once again, the qualitative thing, possible interpretation on this chart, but either way you look at it, the principles are working really well here. I will note that she is another close ascendant, and we could take into the other chart into consideration, but in interest of time, this is taking a long time, and I think just we'll stay with this chart for now. It works well enough for our purposes. The tropical does not change at all. So we'll look at that, see if there's as much demanta going on. Right away we see the ascendant lord Venus gone to the 7th house, and it is hemmed by Jupiter and Mercury, our Karaka lords, and they also Rashi aspect the ascendant. So once again, nice symmetrical kind of chart, just like we had before. And Jupiter is, that third lord aspecting. Jupiter is that third and 6th lord aspecting. Mercury is debilitated here, not quite as strong. The sun is exalted with Venus, so that's a strong placement for the ascendant lord. But overall, less strong connections, not as strong as in the other chart with the parivartana directly relating the lords and Jupiter function. Jupiter slightly lower dignity, just being placed with Saturn there instead of that strong moon in the other chart. Yeah, the Mercury debilitation. So overall, still a decent chart once again. Still demanta going on. Still possible to say, oh yes, the principles are working. But in a side-by-side comparison, sidereal still appears to be working out. Next up, another person who I was on the fence about including. I don't consider him a genius per se. Definitely an intellectual, but he was more of a lecturer and an essayist, but completely famous figure in American history, no doubt, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and definitely more of a spiritual figure, we could say. He was very, him and the Transcendentalists, very attuned to finding themselves in nature. They were very influenced once again by Vedic thought. They had some of the earliest copies of the Gita in the West, as far as I'm aware. They had a strong connection with the Gita particularly. And, he still falls in line with demanta action for sure, but little less, so we can see how it's working. And once again, straight away on Emerson's chart, we see that the ascendant lord is Mercury, gone to the 10th house, in its own house, very strong. And our other Karaka for this is Jupiter in Digbala in the Lagna. So while we don't have a straight connection with 3rd and 6th houses, we still have a connection with the Rashis they're based off of. So it's more of a straight, direct connection. Technically, fills some of the dictums because those planets are strong. They're still the Karaka planets. And technically, when you're looking at a chart, basically if the Karaka is destroyed, a house is destroyed. But that's a whole other thing we won't get into. But either way, we see the Jupiter-Mercury connection very clearly in this chart. And it also speaks to his fame. Emerson, big figurehead, well known. The ascendant lord in the 10th house in his house, very strong for fame, along with Jupiter, giving that idealism and everything else. We won't get into qualitative aspects. But we see the 4th and the 7th house, that extra prashara dictum. Jupiter rules that once again in Digbala, bringing that principle strongly into play. But then what's really important to note in this chart, and you might miss it, is the Graha Malika Yoga. And so this exists when all the planets are, in consecutive houses strung up like a mala. And, this creates a connection between all those planets. And usually the influence is really seen at the end of it. And we see that is on the ascendant lord, it's on Jupiter, it's on the Lagna. Okay, so all of this, we see a really strong connection with the ascendant, which is the self, which is you, along with Mercury and, the outer world and talking and lecturing. And so it's really interesting that, Emerson was more of a lecturer, and his writings are more based around, the speaking he would do in public, the outer public. But one of his best known essays is Self-Reliance. I don't think I need to say anything more. Go read the essay, look at this chart, get into his brain a little. It's a beautiful chart. You look at it, and I mean, you can feel Emerson rating out of it. That's how I feel about it personally. Very interesting chart. And a side note, Rahu in the 6th house, in its own house, another kind of half Demanta combination, but still working pretty well there. If we look at the tropical chart, once again, we see the ascendant has shifted to a Venus ascendant. So we lose that strong association with Mercury or Jupiter that we've been seeing heavily throughout. Venus has gone to the 7th house in a Martian sign. Not so strong. It is aspected by the 5th Lord Rahu, which is in its own house, which is pretty strong. But that's about it. Jupiter definitely in worse dignity here. Jupiter's with Saturn in the 12th house, nowhere near as strong as Jupiter alone in the Lagna. Some other details, Mercury's still in its own house in the 9th house, still strong, still could, give some indications of university and knowledge and all that, which some tropical astrologers might read. But still not in the 10th house, not connected to the ascendant like in the sidereal chart, just not as strong. Moon in Leo, if you see the other chart, Moon's in its own house there, a lot stronger. The Moon's also hammered in this chart with Mars and K2 there. The Graha Malika Yoga is done, so we don't see anywhere near the emphasis of the ascendant on this chart, which is once again one of the intelligence points in the charts. So definitely not as strong of a chart. So definitely more Demanta action happening in the sidereal chart, and but you'll notice too, not quite as strong of associations, intense associations as some of those researchers that we were looking at before. So the principles are still at play, but as you get deeper into it, it can be harder to gauge how some of it's influencing the less strongly the person is associated with research and everything. Which brings us to our last chart, Swami Chandrasekhara Saraswati. So he's very well known in India, highly respected. However, not as well known in the Western kind of yoga world, because in the West it's a little more asana orientated, or if you take a spiritual approach, Yogananda is a huge name, everybody knows him, or like Ram Dass, or some of these bigger figures who have really made a more palatable form of the Hindu Dharma for our country, for how we look at things. But if you want a understanding of Dharma and of the Vedic path from the traditional viewpoint, from someone who knows the culture, who knows the history, who's steeped in it, this is the man to go to. He has a really nice, big 700-page book called, I believe it's called Hindu Dharma. You can Google it. You'll find it free as a PDF. It'll give you, a nice, good, clear introduction to all this knowledge and what it's growing out of, apart from the spin that a lot of modern people put on it. So widely recommended. Just a little background, and he was one of the greatest sages of modern time. Really interesting history. Really, the most remarkable thing, he was recognized as a great saint early in his life, oddly enough, from an astrologer looking at his birth chart, and he was installed as the head of the Kanchi Kamakoti Mat at the age of 13. So he was, head of the Shankacharyas at the age of 13. Okay. That intense, and he's proved his knowledge through and through his life, and his saintliness is clearly recognized from even an early age. And he had just a depth of knowledge of the Vedas, of different practices, of how to do them properly, of how to correct people in their sadhanas, based on the traditional paths. And in addition to that, though, he was a pretty well researched guy. He was still in the modern days, and he could speak about physics and scientific theories and the Western way of life. So he still understood a lot of what was going on in the modern world. So he did have a unique blend of part intellectual researcher, but predominantly Vedic Dharma, Vedic teachings, which was his real focus. And it's important to keep that distinguished, because a lot of people get confused. They think a really high spiritual figure or self-realized person automatically may fit into like a Dimanta combination, or may their knowledge is of all things is correct, or they're very deep researcher or something. These strange association comes up around spirituality and self-realization that really don't hold foot a lot of times. And so he's one of the he's one of these breeds where he has deep knowledge of both kind of things on a certain extent. But just because someone's self-realized does not mean these combinations are going to come up in their chart. There's other combinations for spirituality which you have to check. And so it's important when you're looking at a principle, you're just applying that principle to the chart. Either way, to look at his chart for the Dimanta combinations, we see the sun, ascendant lord, gone to the 10th house in Digbala with Mercury and Jupiter, our two Karaka planets. Beautiful straightaway combination. And we see once again the 10th house connection, the fame connection, right? That comes up time and time again. You'll see it a lot in, some celebrity charts, things like that, artists, all that. But he's extremely well-known, well-respected sage throughout India. So definitely see that coming up. Strong, sattvic learning there. Jupiter, Sun, the sattvic planets coming into effect there with Mercury, who takes on, the indications that it's with. So just a really nice placement there. And then it's in a Parivartana with Venus. And that's a Parivartana between the 3rd and the 5th lords. And Jupiter going, associating some with the 8th house, which once again, has to do with the occult going deep. And, he has all sorts of knowledge of the deeper practices and mantra sadhana, all that stuff, definitely with him. We see, once again, one of the side connections, 4th lord, Mars, going to the 7th house. And as a side note as well, Saturn, the 6th lord, is in quadrants to this, which gives some support to it, another 6th lord support. Not a strong association, but with this many combinations, we don't need it so much. So once again, you see the Dimanta happening. You don't see, once again, that cluster of 4 or 5 planets. He was a little bit more focused in one direction than some of these other monoliths. So some of these larger patterns, you start to see come up. It's not what we're testing, but just interesting things to take note on if you do take up this research, and what to look out for in the chart. Now, if we move to the tropical chart, once again, we see that there is a Mercury association. Mercury's gone to the 9th house, still a nice placement. 9th house can be spiritual teacher, that kind of thing. It's with the sun, sattvic again, bringing in some of those connotations. And it's getting aspected by, a exalted 7th lord Saturn, which one could make, an argument of tradition, coming into play here. But other than that, we don't really see any of the other combinations. We don't see the strong Jupiter combination we had in the other chart. That Parivartanam's not going into effect to bring in, that strong Sambandha with those planets. Sun's not in Digbala. So many things that just aren't working for this chart. Still, some things are, but overall, not quite as strong. And, there's many other things we could pick apart in this chart. We'll leave it at there, but still another example of someone who's not a straight researcher, but, starting to edge the line. And this brings us to our further research and conclusions from this. So I think just based on these charts, once again, these were randomly picked based who I thought was an intellectual, undoubtedly, which, is just a beginning approach to see who would exemplify, see if the yoga was working in the charts and which system was working better. I think it's pretty clear Sidereal was working better with the parameters placed on it, with the principles given in the tradition that I'm looking at. Once again, different traditions have different principles, and you can see that they're working how they should be within the charts very clearly. It's important to note that this does not necessarily extend to other groups of individuals. So we still need to take this and plug it into people who regular people with disabilities, all this kind of thing. So this is the next area that I'm working on, and you still see some of the stuff pop up in certain charts, but it gets less and less clear, particularly when you don't know the people and you don't know the nature of them and how they're applying themselves. And so you need a clear picture on a lot of that, which is where it gets into some middle ground, and which is why I chose these very exemplary figures, so as an initial test to see what was working, what was not. And you can see it's almost like night and day with these figures. But the next stage in research is to go across a random sample of people and see how much of the connections are working, and see if they're just as strong or if they're not as strong. And that's when you start really getting into it. Proper research with blind studies and everything. This is just a walkthrough, and it also helps you kind of pick apart charts. So not conclusive at all. I'm not making any claims. I do know, I will continue with my sidereal studies, undoubtedly, but I'm curious if any of the tropical astrologers want to take this up. That's a point for them, or, give any critiques of what I've done here. I'm definitely open to it. But this was more of an interest in me, and I just wanted to share this because I have yet to see anything like this from the people who are claiming the tropical works better. But I like to keep open, and when somebody's making this strong of a claim, I think it's great to test it, and I'm curious what they have to come up with as well. But yes, further research, and that's where I'm going next, because I work with a lot of students with disabilities, and I have access to birth times, but that gets into some other issues. But I can study some of this, and I know these other people very well, and I have a lot of background within judging intellectual capabilities and things like that, so I can gauge how this works on the other end of the spectrum with that broad range from learning disabilities to that. But that's still an ongoing research. This is just the initial phase of that, and hopefully when I do more proper research, I can write up a proper paper, put it out there. All that can be coming in the future, but for now, this is just the starting point to get some discussion going around the topic, and see if there's anything I'm missing or can be honed better. And once again, further chart considerations come into play. We need a larger sample base, primarily to understand the depth of genius. So these are just the basic Rashi indications, which I've taken because the Rashi is the central chart. If it's where everything manifests, and if it doesn't manifest there, then it doesn't manifest. But you can take some of this into Shadbala, into the Vashtas, into the other strength rules, and start to fine tune and understand why this person's genius, why someone else might not be, and it will take a lot more time to hone that out. But it's something that can be done. And so, those are the basic points I just want to cover with this videos. I hope you've enjoyed them. I hope you've learned something. And, if this has piqued your interest, then, and please feel free to get in touch with my my website. It's a pretty low-key affair. I don't advertise or anything. It's there. It's non-commercial. You can donate. And I'd happy to, it's just there so people can start learning the basics, start seeing what's out there with this world, and start, understanding it for themselves, and hopefully go out, get a master teacher to teach you this stuff. I'm just looking at, the baseline fundamentals how all these things interrelate, because when you start seeing how they all interrelate, it really shapes your perception. You can see it more cohesively. So, if you're interested, please, check out the website, and have a good day.